Section 1. The Blueprint for Deception, December 1943. Camp Forest, Tennessee, United States. The air is sharp with the scent of pine and fresh canvas. But it's the sound, or lack thereof, that is most disquieting. Instead of the rhythmic clatter of tank tracks or the bark of drill sergeants, there is only the whisper of air pumps and the confused murmuring of a handful of new arrivals. Private First Class George C.F. Stevens, a lanky film student drafted straight out of Hollywood, stands clutching a duffel bag, staring at the bizarre contraption taking shape in the middle of the field. It's the size and shape of a M4 Sherman tank, but its skin is a flimsy, olive-drab rubber, stretched taut over an inflated framework. The barrel, a long, thin tube, wobbles slightly in the winter breeze. It is clearly a prop, a child's toy inflated to life size, and it is the key piece of equipment for a secret organization officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Stevens and the 100 other men gathered here are not the hardened infantry or tankers they were trained to be. They are artists, architects, sound engineers, actors, and designers. The misfits of the American military, now assigned to one of the most unusual units ever created. Their mission, conceived by a pair of imaginative staff officers, Colonel H.R. Bull and Major General R.V. Bond, is simple and utterly audacious: to deceive the entire German military high command. They are to become masters of illusion, a phantom army capable of appearing in one place, drawing enemy fire, and then vanishing into the night, only to reappear 30 miles away. The concept, known as visual deception or ruse de guerre, relies on the Germans' own meticulous intelligence gathering. The enemy's reconnaissance pilots are looking for formations, the telltale shape of a divisional headquarters, the dust kicked up by a column of trucks, and the distinctive silhouette of a GMC CCKW truck or a M5 Stuart light tank. The 23rd is here to give them exactly what they think they see, but made entirely of rubber and air. The men begin to learn the craft of the illusionist. They practice inflating the rubber tanks in minutes, creating the necessary thump, thump, thump of heavy equipment with massive, specialized sound trucks carrying speakers the size of small cars. They don the divisional patches of real combat-ready units, like the 1st Army Group, and use fake radio traffic to mimic the pulse of a massive, mobilizing force. Their most important skill, Stevens notes, is acting, convincingly playing the role of a massive, mechanized division for the benefit of local French informants and German spies. They are the understudies to the real war, and their stage is the entire European theater. Stevens looks again at the rubber Sherman. It's ridiculous, but he has an uneasy feeling. If they can make the enemy believe this flimsy creation is real, the men of the 23rd will save thousands of lives. Section 2. Crossing the Channel and the Art of Visual Deception. By the spring of 1944, the Ghost Army, now codenamed Operation Fortitude for the wider deception plan, had crossed the Atlantic, landing in Britain to prepare for the invasion of France. Their first real tests weren't on the battlefield, but in the muddy fields near Bournemouth, where they rehearsed the intricate choreography of a shifting, mechanized force. This was more than just setting up rubber props. It was about the art of visual deception at a granular level. The men learned that a convincing division required more than just tanks. It needed the mundane signs of military life. Camouflage artist Tony Palladino, who would later become a renowned graphic designer, taught the troops how to paint the tire tracks of a heavy Dodge WWII truck onto soft ground using thin layers of oil and paint, simulating weeks of heavy traffic where none existed. They drove a handful of real jeeps and trucks in looping patterns, kicking up the precise amount of dust expected from a column of 500 vehicles. Their most critical pieces of equipment were the 4 companies dedicated to specific forms of trickery. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers, who handled the inflatable props. The 3132nd Signal Service Company, who created the fake radio traffic. The 244th Signal Service Company, managing the massive sound effects. And the Engineer Special Service Platoon, which focused on the actual movement and staging. The sound effects were perhaps the most chillingly effective tool. Recorded at Fort Knox, the soundtracks were meticulously engineered. The screech of metal on metal as a column halted. The distant, muffled thump of artillery practice. The voices of thousands of men moving through the morning mist. These audio landscapes were broadcast using powerful, mobile amplifier systems with a range of up to 15 miles. Convincing any listening post or isolated German patrol that a massive armored movement was underway just over the ridge. After D-Day, the 23rd finally deployed to the continent in June 1944. Their mission was clear: keep the German reserves guessing. Their first significant assignment was near Caen, a grinding battleground where Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was desperately trying to repel the Allied breakthrough. The Ghost Army was positioned to simulate the presence of the experienced 6th Armored Division north of the city, attempting to draw German aerial reconnaissance and artillery spotters toward a collection of empty tents and hot air. Private First Class Stevens remembers the surreal quality of their work near the Falaise Pocket. Under the cover of darkness, they inflated a brigade of tanks. As dawn broke, he watched a lone Luftwaffe spotter plane circle high above. The pilot, no doubt radioing back to headquarters about the strong American armor presence, couldn't see the air valve releasing pressure in the turret of the tank just 50 feet from Stevens's hiding place. The cost of a real tank division being targeted was immeasurable. The cost of an inflatable one was zero. The deception was holding, and the Ghost Army was about to step out of the shadows and directly into the path of danger. Section 3. The Rhine Crossing and Operation Viersen. As the Allied armies pushed toward the German heartland in the late winter of 1944 and early spring of 1945, the deception operations grew bolder and more crucial. The largest challenge, and the Ghost Army's final and most important mission, was the crossing of the Rhine River. This massive operation, codenamed Operation Plunder, required General Patton's real combat forces to seize bridgeheads across the heavily defended river. The Germans knew the crossing was coming, but they didn't know where. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were assigned to a deception plan, codenamed Operation Viersen. Their objective was to convince the enemy that 2 full U.S. divisions, the 30th Infantry Division and the 79th Infantry Division, were preparing to cross the Rhine near the town of Viersen, a full 10 miles south of the actual target crossing point near Rheinberg and Wiesel. For 10 days in March 1945, the 1,100 men of the Ghost Army simulated a force of 40,000. Under the command of Colonel Harry L. Reeder, the operation was executed with unprecedented coordination and realism. The illusion was constructed layer by layer. The 603rd Engineers inflated hundreds of rubber M10 tank destroyers, trucks, and artillery pieces, setting them up in holding areas and along the riverbank. They moved them repeatedly under the cover of smoke screens and darkness, giving German reconnaissance the impression of constantly shifting, massive formations. Meanwhile, the 3132nd Signal Company established a dense network of dummy radio stations, broadcasting genuine Morse code traffic patterns, complete with deliberate mistakes and background static to mimic the pulse of 2 divisional headquarters. The 244th Signal Company worked through freezing nights, projecting the sounds of engineering companies building temporary boat bridges, the clanging of steel pontoons, the shouts of commanders, and the constant hum of heavy machinery, right into the face of the German positions across the water. This was dangerous work. The deception site was within range of German heavy artillery. PFC Stevens and his fellow camoufleurs often worked within earshot of real enemy shells impacting nearby. They had to act like a real division, which meant having men visible enough to be spotted by spies and aerial reconnaissance, yet protected enough to survive the inevitable German response. They used their small contingent of real jeeps, painted with the divisional markings of the 79th Division, driving convoys in long, conspicuous loops. The success of Operation Viersen hinged on its absolute realism. Field Marshal Montgomery's forces, operating where the enemy wasn't expecting them, were able to cross the Rhine with minimal casualties. German High Command, believing the main American thrust was directed at Viersen, thanks to the meticulous work of the 23rd, held back critical reserves. When the actual crossing at Wesel began, the German defense was thin, disoriented, and largely focused on the silent, fake army miles to the south. The Ghost Army had successfully pinned down thousands of German troops without firing a single shot, validating their bizarre, unprecedented assignment. Section 4. The Sound and Silence of Victory. Following the immense success of Operation Viersen, the Ghost Army did not rest. They immediately followed the advancing real units into Germany, continuing their vital, bizarre work of tactical deception. Their role now was to protect the flanks of the rapidly moving armored columns, specifically by simulating units that were miles behind their true position. One of their final, most dangerous missions was protecting the advance of the 9th U.S. Army through the densely populated German countryside. In early April 1945, near the town of Prüm, the 23rd was ordered to impersonate the 33rd Infantry Division. This involved setting up their inflatable tanks, the rubber Shermans and Jeeps now looking increasingly ridiculous against the backdrop of shattered German towns, in positions where the enemy would naturally expect a reserve force to be gathering. The danger was no longer solely from distant artillery. As the Wehrmacht fractured, desperate, highly motivated pockets of German troops and Hitler Youth units were frequently encountered. These small groups were far more likely to approach a unit quietly for intelligence or a direct assault, making close-range detection of the rubber props a constant, terrifying possibility. For the men of the 23rd, the routine was grueling. Set up the fake vehicles at dusk, inflate them in absolute silence, and camouflage the airlines. Through the night, the 3132nd Signal Service Company would broadcast their fictitious radio traffic, building up the Phantom Division's presence. At dawn, a handful of real trucks would drive carefully managed circuits to lay the necessary track patterns. The 244th Sound Unit would then broadcast the noises of a massive camp waking up. The clanging of mess kits, the roar of diesel engines idling, the distinctive, metallic clink of a tank tread turning slowly. Private First Class Stevens and the other artists had to become masters of detail. They learned that the impression of a divisional headquarters wasn't just a cluster of tents. It needed the correct parking pattern of staff cars, a simulated volume of latrine trenches, and even the smell of American rations, which they sometimes achieved by scattering empty K-ration tins. They understood that the most convincing illusion is made of truthful components. Yet, despite their operational success, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops staged over 20 major battlefield deceptions across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. They remained effectively invisible to their own side. Their operations were classified top secret, and even most of the high-ranking officers in the divisions they were protecting were unaware of their existence. This lack of recognition was the ultimate testament to their success. They were the ghost in the machine, and their silent war ended as the rest of the Allies celebrated. Section 5. Post-war silence and the legacy of the misfits. With the collapse of the German military in May 1945, the War of Illusions was over. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops received immediate orders to cease operations and maintain absolute secrecy. The men who had successfully deceived the German High Command across the entire European theater were told to disperse and never speak of their work. They were stripped of their divisional insignia, and their extraordinary mission was classified top secret for decades. The official silence was a necessary security measure. The Allies hoped to employ the tactics of the Ghost Army, especially the sophisticated use of sonic and radio deception in future conflicts. The 100 men, many of whom were budding artists, designers, and performers, returned to a civilian world that had no idea they were heroes. The official military records provided almost no trace of their contribution. PFC George C.F. Stevens, the former film student, returned to Hollywood and went on to direct classic films like A Place in the Sun and Giant. Other notable members included fashion designer Bill Blass, landscape architect James R. Amory, and abstract painter Ellsworth Kelly. Their creative skills, once used to manipulate light, texture, and perspective on canvas or film, had been applied to the battlefield with devastating strategic effect. The true impact of the Ghost Army's work remained an educated guess until the classification was finally lifted in 1996. Only then did historians begin to piece together the evidence of their strategic value. Studies confirmed that in nearly every instance of major deception, from holding down the German 15th Army near Pas-de-Calais before D-Day, to the crucial Operation Viersen at the Rhine, the 23rd successfully manipulated German troop movements. Analysis of German intelligence logs and command reports revealed they consistently mistook the Phantom divisions for real, heavily armed units, diverting critical resources away from actual combat zones. The most conservative estimate suggests the Ghost Army's deceptions saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American soldiers' lives by drawing enemy fire and confusing defensive planning. Their weapons were not M1 Garand rifles or artillery pieces, but imagination, paint, radio static, and the humble rubber tank. They demonstrated that in modern warfare, the perception of power could be as decisive as the power itself. The story of the Ghost Army is a profound testament to the power of non-traditional warfare and the unique contribution of creative minds in the face of brutal conflict. It is a story of a few hundred artists who painted a masterpiece of misdirection on the vast canvas of the European theater. A secret that finally, decades later, was allowed to be told.